Imagine for a moment that you are the captain of an oil tanker in the middle of the freezing North Atlantic Ocean. It is foggy, visibility is near zero. Above you, U.S. military surveillance aircraft are circling. Behind you, a U.S. Coast Guard cutter is closing in. But here is the twist. Below you, somewhere in the deep, a Russian nuclear submarine has been deployed specifically to protect you. This sounds like the plot of a fictional Tom Clancy movie, but this is exactly what has just happened today, January 7th, 2026. The United States military has just executed one of the most high-stakes naval operations of the 21st century, seizing a Russian-flagged vessel roughly 200 kilometers south of Iceland. This wasn't just a simple arrest, it was the climax of a weeks-long chase across the Atlantic involving name changes, false flags, and a direct standoff between Washington and Moscow. But the most terrifying part isn't the seizure itself, it is the precedent this sets for maritime law and how Russia might retaliate. There is a specific legal loophole the U.S. just smashed through to take this ship, and the consequences of that move could change how wars are fought at sea. I will tell you exactly what that dangerous loophole is later in this video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's deep dive analysis. Let's understand exactly what has happened in the last few hours. Breaking reports from Reuters and NBC News confirm that the United States has launched and successfully completed an operation to seize a Russian-flagged oil tanker named the Marinera. This operation was led by the Department of Homeland Security with significant support from the U.S. military. To understand the gravity of this, we need to look at the map. The vessel was secured in the North Atlantic, specifically in the waters south of Iceland. This is a critical strategic choke point known as the GIUK gap, Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom. It is one of the most heavily monitored patches of ocean on Earth, and today it became a crime scene. Now, you might be asking, why is the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard chasing a random oil tanker all the way to Iceland? This story actually begins weeks ago in the Caribbean off the coast of Venezuela. This ship was not always called the Marinera. Until very recently, it was known as the Bella 1. It is part of what experts call the Shadow Fleet, a network of aging, anonymously owned tankers used by countries like Russia, Iran, and Venezuela to bypass Western sanctions. In late December, this ship, then the Bella 1, was attempting to load oil in Venezuela, but the U.S. has been enforcing a strict blockade following the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. The U.S. Coast Guard approached the vessel in the Caribbean with a seizure warrant, suspecting it of carrying sanctioned oil. Here is where the situation turned into a thriller. The crew of the Bella 1 refused to let the Americans board. They turned the ship around and bolted into the open Atlantic. But as they fled, they pulled a move that is highly unusual and legally complex. Mid-voyage, while being chased, they changed the name of the ship to Marinera. More importantly, they painted a Russian flag on the hull and switched their registration from Guyana to Russia. Why did they do this? This is a crucial point. Under international law, specifically the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, a ship flying the flag of a sovereign nation like Russia is generally considered sovereign territory. By switching the flag to Russia, the crew was essentially saying, if you board us now, you're invading Russian territory. Russia immediately backed this play. Moscow formally warned Washington to back off, calling the pursuit harassment, but they didn't just send a diplomatic note. In a move that escalated tensions drastically, the Wall Street Journal reported that Moscow dispatched a submarine and other naval assets to meet the tanker and escort it to safety, likely towards the Russian port of Murmansk. Think about the optical capability here. You have a U.S. Coast Guard cutter, the USCGC Munro, trailing a tanker. You have Russian state media, RT, releasing footage from the deck of that tanker showing the U.S. ship in the distance through the fog. And somewhere underwater, you have a Russian submarine trying to deter the Americans. Despite this Russian naval presence, the U.S. did not blink. Over the last 48 hours, flight tracking data showed a massive surge of U.S. military activity in the region. We're talking about P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft, which are submarine hunters, flying from the UK. Even more interestingly, 3 U-28A Draco airplanes were spotted. These are highly specialized planes used by the U.S. Air Force Special Operations Command for reconnaissance. When you see U-28s, it usually means special forces are involved. The climax happened today. The ship made an abrupt turn south and slowed down to about 8 knots. This was the moment of the seizure. U.S. officials have confirmed the ship is secured and U.S. law enforcement is on board. So why did the U.S. decide to risk a direct military confrontation with Russia over one tanker? It comes down to the cargo and the ownership. The ship is accused of violating sanctions by transporting oil for the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps and Hezbollah. The owner, a company called Submarine Shipholding based in Turkey, was sanctioned by the U.S. in 2024. The U.S. argument is that the reflagging to Russia was a sham. Under Article 110 of the Law of the Sea, warships can board foreign vessels if there is reasonable ground to suspect the ship is without nationality or flying a false flag. By painting a Russian flag on the hull mid-chase, the Marinera tried to use international law as a shield. The U.S. decided that this flag of convenience tactic would not stand. This brings me back to the hook, the dangerous loophole and the precedent. By seizing this ship, despite it flying a Russian flag and having a Russian submarine escort, the U.S. has effectively declared that it will not respect mid-voyage reflagging as a defense. If the U.S. had backed down, every Shadow Fleet tanker in the world would simply carry a bucket of paint and a Russian flag to use whenever the U.S. Navy appeared. This event is not isolated. It's happening while the U.S. is in a standoff with Denmark over Greenland, with the new Donroe Doctrine being challenged by China. It's happening right after the U.S. raid in Venezuela. The seizure of the Marinera is a signal that the U.S. is aggressively enforcing its blockade, regardless of Russian protection. Now we must watch Moscow's reaction. They've called this hijacking and piracy. With a Russian submarine in the vicinity, the potential for a miscalculation is incredibly high. The ship is now under U.S. control, likely being towed to a U.S. or allied port, but the diplomatic and military waves from this operation in the freezing North Atlantic will be felt for a long time. This is a developing story, and the geopolitical chess game has just become much more dangerous.